The origin of the seasons. Demeter, the great earth mother, was goddess of the harvest. Tall and majestic was her appearance, and her hair was the color of ripe wheat. It was she who filled the ears with grain. In her honor, white robed women brought golden garlands of wheat as first fruits to the altar. Reaping, threshing, winnowing, and the long table set in the shade for the harvester's refreshment, all these were hers. Songs and feasting did her honor as the hard-working farmer gathered his abundant fruit. All the laws which the farmer knew came from her. The time for plowing, what land would best bear crops, which was fit for grapes, and which to leave for pasture. She was a goddess whom men called the Great Mother because of her generosity in giving. Her own special daughter in the family of the gods was named Persephone. Persephone was the spring maiden, young and full of joy. Sicily was her home, for it is a land where the spring is long and lovely, and where spring flowers are abundant. Here, Persephone played with her maidens from day to day, till the rocks and valleys rang with the sound of laughter. And gloomy Hades heard it as he sat on his throne in the dark land of the dead. Even his heart of stone was touched by her gay young beauty, so that he arose in his awful majesty and came up to Olympus to ask Zeus if he might have Persephone to wife. Zeus bowed his head in agreement, and mighty Olympus thundered as he promised. Thus it came about that as Persephone was gathering flowers with her maidens in the vale of Enna, a marvelous thing happened. Enna was a beautiful valley in whose meadows all the most lovely flowers of the year grew at the same season. There were wild roses, purple crocuses, sweet-scented violets, tall iris, rich narcissus, and white lilies. All these the girl was gathering. Yet fair as they were, Persephone herself was fairer far. As the maidens went picking and calling to one another across the blossoming meadow, it happened that Persephone strayed apart from the rest. Then as she looked a little ahead in the meadow, she suddenly beheld the marvelous thing. It was a flower so beautiful that none like it had ever been known. It seemed a kind of narcissus, purple and white, but from a single root there sprang 100 blossoms, and at the sweet scent of it the very heavens and earth appeared to smile for joy. Without calling to the others, Persephone sprang forward to be the first to pick the precious bloom. As she stretched out her hand, the earth opened in front of her, and she found herself caught in a stranger's arms. Persephone shrieked aloud and struggled while the armful of flowers cascaded down to earth. However, the dark-eyed Hades was far stronger than she. He swept her into his golden chariot, took the reins of his coal-black horses, and was gone amid the rumbling sound of the closing earth before the other girls in the valley could even come in sight of the spot. When they did get there, nobody was visible. Only the roses and lilies of Persephone lay scattered in wild confusion over the grassy turf. Bitter was the grief of Demeter when she heard the news of her daughter's mysterious fate. Veiling herself with a dark cloud, she sped, swift as a wild bird, over land and ocean for 9 days, searching everywhere and asking all she met if they had seen her daughter. Neither gods nor men had seen her. Even the birds could give no tidings. And Demeter, in despair, turned to Phoebus Apollo, who sees all things from his chariot in the heavens. "Yes, I have seen your daughter," said the god at last. "Hades has taken her with the consent of Zeus, that she may dwell in the land of mist and gloom as his queen." The girl struggled and was unwilling, but Hades is far stronger than she. When she heard this, Demeter fell into deep despair, for she knew she could never rescue Persephone if Zeus and Hades had agreed. She did not care any more to enter the palace of Olympus, where the gods live in joy and feasting, and where Apollo plays the lyre while the muses sing. She took on her the form of an old woman, worn but stately, and wandered about the earth, where there is much sorrow to be seen. At first she kept away from the homes of people, since the sight of little children and happy mothers gave her pain. One day, however, as she sat by the side of a well to rest her weary feet, 4 girls came down to draw water. They were kind-hearted and charming as they talked with her and concerned themselves about the fate of the homeless stranger woman who was sitting at their gates. To account for herself, Demeter told them that she was a woman of good family from Crete across the sea, who had been captured by pirates and was to have been sold for a slave. She had escaped as they landed once to cook a meal on shore, and now she was wandering to find work. The four girls listened to this story, much impressed by the stately manner of the strange woman. At last they said that their mother, Metaneira, was looking for a nurse for their newborn brother, Demophoon. Perhaps the stranger would come and talk with her. Demeter agreed, feeling a great longing to hold a baby once more, even if it were not her own. She went, therefore, to Metaneira, who was much struck with the quiet dignity of the goddess and glad to give her charge of her little son. For a while thereafter, Demeter was to nurse Demophoon, and his smiles and babble consoled her in some part for her own darling daughter. She began to make plans for Demophoon. He would be a great hero. He would become an immortal, so that when he grew up, she could keep him with her. Presently, the whole household was amazed at how beautiful Demophoon was growing, the more so as they never saw the nurse feed him anything. Secretly, Demeter would anoint him with ambrosia, like the gods, and from her breath, as he lay in her lap, he would draw his nourishment. When the night came, she would linger by the great fireside in the hall, rocking the child in her arms where the embers burned low and the people went off to sleep. Then, when all was still, she would stoop quickly down and put the baby into the fire itself. All night long the child would sleep in the red-hot ashes, while his earthly flesh and blood changed slowly into the substance of the immortals. In the morning, when people came, the ashes were cold and dead, and by the hearth sat the stranger woman gently rocking and singing to the child. Presently, Metaneira became suspicious of the strangeness of it all. What did she know of this nurse but the stories she had heard from her daughters? Perhaps the woman was a witch of some sort who wished to steal or transform the boy. In any case, it was wise to be careful. One night, therefore, when she went up to her chamber, she set the door ajar and stood there in the crack, silently watching the nurse at the fireside, crooning over the child. The hall was very dark, so that it was hard to see clearly, but in a little while the mother beheld the dim figure bend forward. A log broke in the fireplace, a little flame shot up, and there, clear in the light, lay the baby on top of the fire. Metaneira screamed loudly and lost no time in rushing forward, but it was Demeter who snatched up the baby. "Fool that you are," she said indignantly to Metaneira. "I would have made your son immortal, but that is now impossible. He shall be a great hero, but in the end, he will have to die. I, the goddess Demeter, promise it." With that, old age fell from her and she grew in stature. Golden hair spread down over her shoulders so that the great hall was filled with light. She turned and went out of the doorway, leaving the baby on the ground, and Metaneira too amazed and frightened even to take him up. All the while that Demeter had been wandering, she had given no thought to her duties as the harvest goddess. Instead, she was almost glad that others should suffer because she was suffering. In vain the oxen spent their strength in dragging the heavy plowshare through the soil. In vain did the sower with his bag of grain throw out the even handfuls of white barley in a wide arc as he strode. The greedy birds had a feast off the seed corn that season, or if it started to sprout, sun baked it and rains washed it away. Nothing would grow. As the gods looked down, they saw threatening the earth a famine such as never had been known. Even the offerings to the gods were neglected by despairing men who could no longer spare anything from their dwindling stores. At last Zeus sent Iris, the rainbow, to seek out Demeter and appeal to her to save mankind. Dazzling Iris swept down from Olympus swiftly as a ray of light and found Demeter sitting in her temple, the dark cloak still around her and her head bowed on her hand. Though Iris urged her with the messages of Zeus and offered beautiful gifts, or whatever powers among the gods she chose, Demeter would not lift her head or listen. All she said was that she would neither set foot on Olympus nor let fruit grow on the earth until Persephone was restored to her from the kingdom of the dead. At last Zeus saw that he must send Hermes of golden sandals to bring back Persephone to the light. The messenger found dark-haired Hades sitting upon his throne with Persephone beside him, pale and sad. She had neither eaten nor drunk since she had been in the land of the dead. She sprang up with joy at the message of Hermes, while the dark king looked gloomier than ever, for he really loved his queen. Though he could not disobey the command of Zeus, he was crafty, and he pressed Persephone to eat or drink with him as they parted. Now, with joy in her heart, she should not refuse all food. Persephone was eager to be gone, but since the king entreated her, she took a pomegranate from him to avoid argument and delay. Giving in to his pleading, she ate 7 of the seeds. Then Hermes took her with him, and she came out into the upper air. When Demeter saw Hermes with her daughter, she started up, and Persephone too rushed forward with a glad cry and flung her arms around her mother's neck. For a long time, the two caressed each other, but at last Demeter began to question the girl. "Did you eat or drink anything with Hades?" she asked her daughter anxiously, and the girl replied, "Nothing until Hermes released me. Then, in my joy, I took a pomegranate and ate 7 of its seeds." "Alas," said the goddess in dismay, "my daughter, what have you done? The fates have said that if you ate anything in the land of shadow, you must return to Hades and rule with him as his queen. However, you ate not the whole pomegranate, but only 7 of the seeds. For 7 months of the year, therefore, you must dwell in the underworld, and the remaining 5 you may live with me." Thus the fates had decreed, and even Zeus could not alter their law. For 7 months of every year, Persephone is lost to Demeter and rules pale and sad over the dead. At this time, Demeter mourns, trees shed their leaves, cold comes, and the earth lies still and dead. But when, in the 8th month, Persephone returns, her mother is glad, and the earth rejoices. The wheat springs up, bright, fresh, and green in the plowland. Flowers unfold, birds sing, and young animals are born. Everywhere, the heavens smile for joy or weep sudden showers of gladness upon the springing earth.